Hello and welcome to the Think Big series brought to you by PSG. I'm Alishia Seckam. So the 2024 elections have come and gone, and after much anticipation and speculation in the run-up to it, the results are in, and we now sit with the aftermath of the ANC losing its majority, garnering only 40% of the vote, marking a fall below 50% for the first time since 1994. In fact, the results themselves already in part answering a viewer question that came through asking, do you think that the ANC is still the relevant party to govern South Africa after 30 years of being in power and with all that's unraveling in South Africa? But while the voting public may have spoken, what we now face is the reality of a move from one-party dominance towards multi-party governance at national level. So what are the pros and cons, and how exactly will this work? Bottom line, where does this new political climate take economic policy and the implementation thereof? Joining me now with his take is political analyst Moeletsi Mbeki, and he's going to be sharing his perspective on where we're at and where we're potentially headed. Thanks so much, Moeletsi, for joining us today. And I'm going to start off with a quote from the main opposition right at the top. The way to rescue South Africa is to break the ANC's majority, and we've done that. Moeletsi, has enough of a lesson been learned to put us at a turning point? Do you see the 2024 elections as a watershed election for South Africa?
Unfortunately, I don't see it as a watershed election. If we are using the criterion of the ANC losing its majority, the watershed election was actually the local government election in November 2021, when the national tally of the local government, the ANC got 45.6% of the national vote. So that was the watershed election, not this one, because we knew already that the ANC was not going to get a majority in this election. So it's not a watershed election, not by any means.
Like you say, the local government elections are acting as a precursor, and so we were anticipating this result, right? I have to ask, though, are you surprised at where loyalty-based politics hasn't worked in the favor of the ANC? It seems to have worked full force for the MK party, so much so that people have said that ethnicity-based politics has gotten a revival.
Yes, I think people are in a hurry to put labels. We South Africans like labels because that's what a lazy person who is lazy to think does. He puts on a label on things, and then he thinks that issue has been thoroughly analyzed just by making it a label. The reality is that the ANC has been losing the support primarily of the black working class in the metros. That's who had been voting for the ANC before. That's who had been the primary voter for the ANC. Since 2016, in fact, since the local government in 2016, the ANC has been losing the support of the black working class in the metros. And what has kept it afloat has been the rural vote in the former homelands. That has been the situation. Now, the MK party, the notion that you label it as an ethnic party and you think you have understood the phenomenon, well, that is childish. People have to study who voted for the MK party. The MK party was voted on in many places. I saw they got elected in Northwest Province, for example. They got a person elected there. So the people think just by giving a label that has answered the question. No, it hasn't. That's not an analysis to describe the MK party as an ethnic party.
Okay, so labels aside, what this does mark, Moeletsi, is a democracy at work, right? The Constitution always envisioned a multi-party democracy, but whether it comes with the maturity needed to effectively deal with the level of complexity that comes with a unity government or a coalition era. That's what's got many unnerved at this point, asking whether it's a good or a bad thing. So where political expedience or a government that is people-centered, that puts the country first, hasn't necessarily been our strong suit, are you worried?
No, I'm not worried at all. We are what is called a capitalist society. A capitalist society puts interests of the social groups or the social classes first. That's how it operates. We South Africans uh, haven't been understanding how a capitalist society works. The reason we don't understand is because we have lived for hundreds of years with race-based society decided by race. Well, we no longer live in a society where race is a determinant of what happens in our society. It's socioeconomic interests today that decides. So we have to get out of our mindset that race decides, is a determining factor on how our society works. It's socioeconomic interests that determine at the end of the day how our government works, who is the government, whose interests does the government, the ruling party represents. The ruling party, just to be brief, the ANC represents the interests of the African middle class, and it has said so over and over again. That's why its primary policy is Black economic empowerment, to empower the Black middle class. That has been the interest, and that's who formed the ANC. That's who the ANC represents.
Yeah. And, this is where we find ourselves at now, with a focus on government and what the new government looks like, right? So, what for you are the building blocks of cooperation for a government of national unity? Because we've seen that, parties looking to govern by forging unity out of diversity tend to fragment when they're confronted by fundamental political or an economic crisis. And what we've seen play out at local government level certainly hasn't bolstered any confidence in terms of where things stand now, if we do venture into what's anticipated to be very focused coalition talks.
Well, we have to, the coalitions at municipal level have been a good lesson for us, but they are not the whole lesson. Remember, the stakes, the question of how high are the stakes? At municipal level, the stakes are low. At national level, the stakes are very high. So you don't expect the same behavior at national level where you have very high stakes, the same as where you have very low stakes, which is at municipal level. So that is one. So there is a limit to what we can learn from coalitions at municipal level. That's point number one. Point number two, the Constitution does not stipulate how many votes. All it stipulates is that members of parliament must meet and elect a president. It does not say that president must be elected from a party with 51% of the votes or such thing. It just say members of parliament must meet and elect a president. So the ANC can still get elected as president by the members of by those members of parliament who support it. It doesn't have to enter into a coalition with anyone if that's what happens.
Mm-hmm. So, Moeletsi, clear this up for us. I mean, what are some of the permutations you're considering that could be the best of the options to bring stability in government and economic growth for South Africa sustainably so, with tangible on the ground change for citizens?
Well, the current parties in that we have in South Africa, let's put it, let's say the top 5 parties. These are all middle class parties, and they are advancing the interests of the middle classes to the exclusion of all the other social groups in our society. That is what causes instability in South Africa. It's not whether the ANC has a majority, minority, the DA has this or that. That what is causing an instability in South Africa is that other social groups in our society feel that their interests are not represented in the decision making of the South African state today. The Black workers don't feel their interests are being represented. The white capitalists don't feel their interests are being represented. The poor coloreds don't feel their interests are being represented. That's what's causing instability in South Africa. And whether the DA and the ANC unite, these are both representing the interests of the middle class. One represents essentially the interests of the white middle class, white English-speaking middle class. The other represents the interests of the African middle class. But both of them don't represent the interests of the working class, white, colored, Indian, African. They don't represent their interests. And that's what's causing instability in South Africa. That is the primary problem. It's not the political, whether the ANC has this, that, or the. It's that these parties are not representative of the great majority of our population.
So let's then, with that being said, start to focus. And I know you don't like being speculative. There's still a lot of dust that still needs to settle here. But let's put the focus then on the kind of things that a new government, however that may look, will need to change to get South Africa back on track. What should be priority number one as you see it?
Well, first, South Africa is not off track. Can I make that correction? The DA is making propaganda that South Africa needs to be rescued. South Africa is not in a crisis. South Africa is not off track. Yes, the railways are not working. Yes, Eskom is not working, or the government says now it is working. But South Africa is not off track and it's not in a crisis. What the ANC has done, the ANC government, it hasn't brought about a crisis in our society. What it has done, it has mismanaged the railway system. It has mismanaged the electricity supply system. It has disincentivized entrepreneurship by its policies of Black economic empowerment and so on. But that doesn't mean the country is in a crisis or off the rails or needs to be rescued, as Mr. Steenhuisen says. No, there's no crisis like that in South Africa.
Let me rephrase then, Moeletsi. How do we get a handle on mismanagement that has kind of taken us off course?
No, the mismanagement hasn't taken us off course. It has taken the users of the railways, it has given them a huge problem. It has given our exporting industries that export iron ore, that export coal, that export granite, it's given them a problem. It has given our importers who are importing whatever they're importing huge problems with congested ports and so on.
And with huge economic
consequences. Crisis for the country.
But huge economic consequence coming along with that.
Yes, they're huge economic costs. But then that's the ANC. That's why people are starting to vote against the ANC. It's because it is not able to manage the economy in a way that the voters want it to be managed, but that doesn't constitute a crisis.
Okay, what would be priority number one then to get a better handle on management of the country?
Well, it depends who is the government. The ANC, remember the ANC, the DA, MK party, and so on and so. They all had manifestos, and in their manifestos, they said how they were going to manage the economy. So that's on the basis of their manifestos that the voters voted them in. And so we have to see who gets elected by parliament. But whoever gets elected by parliament, their party has a manifesto. And so we have to go back to their manifesto and look at what they say they are going to do or on how to manage the economy.
Of course, that is, the line of thought. If you had to advise this new government, whoever they may be, what would your advice be, Moeletsi?
If I were advise a new government, if it were an ANC government, I would say cancel Black economic empowerment, repeal every law that says Black economic empowerment. The DA says that it doesn't like Black economic empowerment, so then that wouldn't be an issue if the DA. And interestingly, I think the MK party also says it doesn't like Black economic empowerment. So we already can see that there's agreement between the MK party and the DA about Black economic empowerment. But the ANC, the president of the ANC, in their last rally at FNB Stadium, said he's sticking with Black economic empowerment. To me, that has been the main driver of corruption. That has been the main driver of inefficiency in our economy. So I would say scrap it if the ANC is part of the new government.
So, Moeletsi, you talk about economic empowerment policies effectively being a blunt tool. How do we then address a question like this one that in fact came through from a viewer today? How can we achieve economic balances in a country between those who benefited economically during apartheid and those who suffer the consequence of apartheid legacy disparities?
No, we don't elect a government. The citizens of South Africa don't elect a government to address the past. They elect a government to create a better future. That's what they elected to do. The ANC is focusing on the past. And that's one of its problems. That's why the voters are starting to abandon it. We need a government that is going to build a better future for South Africans, not that is going to solve the past. You can't solve the past. The past has happened. So what we don't have in South Africa are parties that are telling us how they're going to make our economy to employ all the able-bodied people of South Africa who want to work. That's what I want to hear. I haven't heard how they're going to do it. All the political parties and the manifestos that I've seen, I haven't heard how they're going to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had lots of commentary coming through saying that, as a Black South African, one viewer writing in, I feel that economic policies are either wrong or not correctly applied. And without that working model to grow the economy, all promises of all political parties cannot be realized. Moeletsi, as far as SOEs go, you've said before that in 1994, it may have looked like we inherited a treasure, but it really was a poisoned chalice on account of, not knowing how to effectively manage these things with the right skills and the know-how in place. How much of that now do we then carry over to the private sector? And of course, it's with policies like BEE, right? You've said you're calling for the doing away with empowerment policies that run against the principle of a non-racial democracy. Where does the focus now shift? Surely it's got to go into skills development. It's got to start going into education and developing policies and stronger, more efficient policies in those respects.
Yes, you see, we have the most what was not discussed in this election that we've just heard? There were lots of issues that were not discussed. How to solve the unemployment, but one of the most important issues that was not even mentioned is, besides having the most unequal society in the world and the highest unemployment in the world, we also have the most expensive public service in the world. And those issues are all interrelated. Just to illustrate the point, the public service in the South African public service is the highest paid in the world as a percentage of the gross domestic product of South Africa. OECD did a study of the cost of the public service in South Africa, and it came to the conclusion that the public service salary, the remuneration of the public service, was more than 14% of GDP. What does this mean? What this means is that we are taking resources from our economy through the tax system and giving phenomenal high salaries to the public servants. The government revealed itself that 55,000 public servants, including politicians, earn more than R1 million a year. This is a hugely expensive public service. For similar countries to South Africa at similar stage of development, like Indonesia, like Chile in South America, the public service is only 5% of GDP. So we are taking our profits from our economy and giving them as enormous salary to the public service, but then we have no money to invest in our education system, in our railways, in the maintenance of our roads, or for our infrastructure of our railways. That is a critical problem that South Africa faces. Now, whether the ANC is in coalition with anyone else, if the public service remains at this enormously expensive, at this enormous high cost to the economy, South Africa is going nowhere. We have to cut the cost of the public service at least by half. That's what has to happen if our economy is going to start moving forward. Today, the South African investment as a percentage of GDP is only 14%. If you look at Asian countries like Vietnam, like Indonesia, like India, those are over 30% of GDP. And the National Development Plan had said way back in 2011, South Africa has to have 30% of investment to GDP. Today, it is sitting at 14%, but as a percentage of GDP. That's why our economy is stuck, is stagnating with these huge levels of unemployment. Our education system is producing unqualified people. Children can't read for meaning who should be able to read for meaning. And you know the list.
And Moeletsi, this is well known, right? There have been attempts to rein things in, but then a caving in once we have various sectors threatening to hold, the country to ransom, setting somewhat of a precedent. So how do we break that? And how do we get to cutting this bloated wage bill in half?
Well, that's for the government of the day. That's what it has to do. Whoever is in government, whether on their own or in coalition, the two partners or three partners, however many coalition we're going to end up with, that's one of their priorities, is to cut the public service, bloated public service salaries in half.
Of course, part of the rationale here, Moeletsi, would be to then redirect that spend into capital investment, but productively so. So again, back to policy then, is policy getting in the way? We talk about, the energy sector seeing some light at the end of the tunnel as policies opened up, but then we take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back with a policy on NHI.
Oh, yeah, but those are ANC policies. And the voters have sent a message to the ANC of what they think of its policies. Hopefully, the ANC will learn something. If, however, they persist with their current policies and they get elected as president and they form the government, even with a coalition partner, if they continue with the present policies, then in 2029 they'll be wiped out. They might even be wiped out in the next local government election.
Okay, does all of this warrant another book, Moeletsi, on your end? Considering what South Africa's gone through since you told us about the big men, have you considered bringing out an updated edition?
No, it doesn't warrant a book. It warrants action. You see, we South Africans, we love forming parties like individual cult figures forming parties, but we are not for COSATU. For example, in 2011, if I remember correctly, COSATU members said it must form a Labour Party, not a party of big men. It said it must form, but the COSATU leadership who are in partnership with the ANC didn't want to lose the whatever gravy they get from their partnership, and they didn't do so. We have yet to form new parties in South Africa that represent all the social and economic groups of South Africa. So as I pointed out so far, we have middle-class parties. We don't have parties of capitalists. We don't have parties of workers. We don't have parties of the poor. We have middle-class parties, and the middle-class parties are looking after the middle class, and that's what we have in South Africa. So we are at the beginning of our democratic journey. So we should stop despairing and thinking that there are instant solutions. We are at the beginning of the democratic journey. There are new parties that are going to emerge in South Africa, which will be totally different from the crowd that was as the 52 who were standing for the National Assembly. Yes, some of them will still be there. The middle class will still be there and have its own parties yet. So, but there are going to be new parties who represent other social classes besides the middle class. So we have a very exciting politics ahead for South Africa and a very exciting development of democracy in this country.
So South Africa in the next 5 years, Moeletsi, I mean, where's it placed your bar of expectation as far as the where to from here goes?
South Africa in the next 5 years, I think, I don't see how the present policies are going to, the present policies, whether the ANC is on its own or the ANC is in coalition with DA or MK or EFF or IFP, I don't see the main policies changes because, as I say, all these parties are beneficiaries of this hugely paid public sector, and they want to retain it. They are not going to. So South African economy is going to continue stagnating with the present parties that we have, and South Africa will continue the society to be unstable with the poor, with the endless demonstrations, and then the economy in a tailspin downwards. That's what I expect to happen with the parties that are now sitting in parliament. Whether there is one of them or they all work together as a GNU, that's what I expect to happen.
But you maintain that South Africa is still not in a crisis.
No, it's not in a crisis. It's not in a crisis yet. It may yet be in a crisis, but it's not in a crisis yet. So to say it's going to be rescued, it's not sitting somewhere in a donga or in a ravine somewhere where it has to be rescued. No, South Africa is not in a crisis.
Let's leave it there, Moeletsi. Thanks so much for having joined us today. Moeletsi Mbeki is, of course, a political analyst. And that's where we leave things with you for this episode of the PSG Think Big series. Of course, keep the conversation going on the various online platforms, social media platforms, using hashtag ThinkBigPSG. Until next time, from me, Alishia Seckam, it's goodbye.